Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're going to talk about red lines, and North Korea. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and we're going to talk about red lines in North Korea. And since we're talking about North Korea, I'm going to mention something that was said in a chat and tell you what I think about it because we're talking about North Korea. So, Pepe Valdez says, no such word as neocons. They are communist, Bolshevik instigators, communists. Well, I disagree with you, and I will add a little bit of rebuttal. If Victoria Nuland and Biden and Tony Blinken are communists per se, but certainly they would be allied with other communists, wouldn't they? I mean, communism, I would think, would be something that there's alliances, right? Now, it is my belief. I'll tell you what. I'll never forget. I had a guy call into my Los Angeles radio show, KPFK, telling me that communism was left wing. Communism's left wing. He said communism is a left wing thing. I said, okay. Hitler, is he right wing or left wing? Franco, and I went on and on, and I named all of these people that were right wing. Mussolini. I said all right wing. In fact, they hated left wing. They hated communists. Now, Stalin, I would consider Stalin a fascist. He was a communist, so he was clearly a left-wing fascist. So the reality is fascism. He's like, fascism is always communism. I like fascism can be what it can be. It can be communism. It can be far right. But when someone says the neocons are communists, that would mean that North Korea, who is a very strong and steady ally with a communist North Korea, strong and steady ally with Russia, that would mean that they're neocons. That would mean also that China is neocons. Vietnam, run by the Communist Party, that would mean that all of these countries. How about this? What is the Socialist Party runs Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, right? All erstwhile steadfast allies of Russia and China, and the United States is trying to overthrow them. So the neocons in the US, by that logic, is basically every country in the world that's run by socialist or communist. The Biden and the neocons are trying to overthrow or go to war with their government. So if the neocons are communists, then why do they hate communists so bad? Kind of logically speaking, it doesn't really ideologically align. But here's what I think. Hitler was a socialist. Yeah, really. Well, he sure hated communists and killed everyone he possibly could. He wasn't a very good one, I'll tell you that. Hitler was. At any rate, he was. Look, what was it? The National Socialist Party. He was neither nationalist nor socialist. It's kind of like George Bush George W. Bush when he named this. What was he called? The Clean Air Act or Clean Skies Act, and basically gutted every rule and regulation that helped that was fought against air pollution. The words that you use to describe something doesn't necessarily mean it's that. But the idea that the neocons are communists and that the one thing the neocons hate first and foremost is communists because they're communists. What I suspect is you hate communists, or at least what you think is communist. There are a lot of people in the West who have been trained. I find that communism is bad. I'm not saying communism is good or bad. Here's what I'm saying. If I'm going to be trained that it's bad, at least I'm going to know what the hell it is. And in the West, a lot of people just don't know the ideologies. They just know this. I hate this ideology, and I've been trained that it's bad. I don't really know what it is that much, but everything I hate must be it. That's what we weren't run into. So I'm going to leave it at that. Let's move forward. All right. Red lines. one of the things that we've heard for a while, the part of the discussion that we've heard is this term red lines, Russia's red lines, China's red lines. Where it really started getting big was somewhere around 2011, 12, somewhere around that, 12, when in Syria, when basically here's what happened. Barack Obama said, our red line with Syria, in other words, under this instance, we will attack the country and we'll start a military invasion of Syria. And the red line is, if they, now it's interesting because he said, my red line is if they use weapons of mass destruction against their people. And a week later, the neocons are like, hey, good news. I mean, oops. I mean, yeah. Oh, this is terrible news. Oh, darn. Um, Syria used weapons of mass destruction against its own people. So guess we'll have to attack them. And bottom line was, there was votes in Congress and what have you. And bottom line, it didn't happen. But here's the reality. When Donald Trump came in, Donald Trump said, look, he said, if there was weapons of mass destruction, we draw, a year after it happened with Obama. That's what it was. So it must have been 2015. If in fact, my red lines, weapons of mass destruction, if weapons of mass destruction are used, if poison stuff is used, then we'll have to act. And of course, within days, oh, what do you know? There's weapons of mass destruction in Syria now. Research into both of those found that they were poppycock, they were false flags at best, nothing at worst, and so the bottom line was I would argue the neocons and the intelligence community, when an American president basically said, I'm drawing a red line, basically they read it like this: what do we need to do to go to war with Syria? Because we want you to go to war with Syria. And when the president said, I have a red line, for instance, if Barack Obama or Donald Trump, either one, have said, okay, if you jump up and down 3 times and say, Mother, may I, then I'll go to war. The neocons would all been jumping up and down saying, Mother, may I. They just needed to know. So when they said, my red line is X, they just needed to know what the red line was so they could cross it. Not really, but pretend to have crossed it. And then boom, they could get the war that they want. Because if you're neocons, all you ever want is another war, right? So it never worked. But that was when really in America, people started talking about that term, red lines. That was Syria. And then the neocons got mad. Well, Syria crosses red line. Why didn't Obama act? Well, because Syria did no such thing, for starters. Secondly, the United States does not have the authority to go around the world and just attack any country in the world at any given time, even though they think they do. It's an international crime. It's called a war of aggression, which is an international crime, which is why all the leaders of the United States should be in jail, should be at the Hague, should be in jail for international war crimes, particularly the wars of aggression. But what we've heard about in recent times, in recent years, let me see if I can get a little better sound here. How about that? Okay, yeah, I got a little better sound for myself, not for you people. So at any rate, yeah, I need to hear myself in when I'm talking. I don't know why. I guess I'm just accustomed to doing it from doing radio. So in recent times, this has been a discussion about Russia, and the discussion has been, what is Russia's red lines? And there was never really a discussion about what that meant, about a red line being, if we do this, Russia will do that. Because Russia's the Russian leadership is very, very reticent to tell you what they'll do, what their plans are, what's happening with them. They ain't giving up much information, mum's the word, radio silence, etc. when it comes to Russian leadership. So even the two things had to happen. The neocons, the West leadership, had to guess what Russia's red lines were, because Russia most of the time was going to say, don't do this or don't do that, but they weren't going to come out and say that's a red line. Now with Ukraine, they did. They said, look, that's a red line. If you bring Ukraine into NATO, or alternatively bring NATO into Ukraine, because that's what they basically said. I mean, Ukraine is a de facto member of NATO. To argue that Ukraine's not a member of NATO, does NATO, really the US, pay all the bills for Ukraine, pay all of the salaries for everybody in Ukraine, pay the pensions in Ukraine, provide the intelligence for Ukraine and targeting for Ukraine and the missiles? So they're going to tell you what to shoot, when to shoot, where to shoot at, and give you something to shoot with, right? So the bottom line is this is NATO using Ukraine as a, as I've put many times, using Ukraine in the same way that a burglar uses a glove to cover his hand so he doesn't leave fingerprints. That's all that Ukraine is for the West. So the discussion about a red line was always how will the Russians respond? What the discussion in Ukraine of red lines really meant, how will the Russians respond? How far can we go? And the question was this: how far can the neocons take it before they provoke World War III? That was it. Before they provoke Russia to the point where Russia attacks, responds to an attack, whatever the case, by hitting a NATO facility somewhere outside of Ukraine. Now, here's what I think. I think, particularly now, that the Russians understand this dynamic. They're winning. See, that's the big part of it. Now, in the West, you got to pretend that the Russians aren't winning. You got to pretend that they're fighting with, whatever shovels, blah, 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 and they're not winning. And if they weren't winning, that would create some level of desperation, but they are. And the Russians know it. So what that creates is the term that we use in boating: maintain course and speed. If you are planning to go from this buoy to that buoy, from this marker to that marker, and you can see that marker, and you're in gear and your speed's going fine and your course is taking you to the marker, guess what? Maintain course and speed, because you're going to get to the marker. Now, between here and there, some things could happen, but you're still heading for that marker. Maintain course and speed, get to that next marker, right? That next buoy, right? And I think all the discussion of red lines for Russia ignores the reality. It ignores this reality that Russia's winning. And the likelihood is that if you're winning, if you're getting where you're going to get, that you're going to maintain course and speed. So the discussion of red lines is about striking Russia in the rear. But it's not like they've struck Russia with, they flattened a city in Russia. Generally, it's like a missile or two gets through and hits a base in Crimea. This is war. It happens. A quadcopter with a small charge on it slams into the side of a building in the financial district of Moscow or something, and like breaks some windows. A drone, bends the flagpole on the Kremlin and knocks off a couple of roofing tiles. Right? These things are symbolic. That's the thing about it. These so-called crossings of red lines are symbolic crossings of red lines. It's not like they flattened a base somewhere. It's not like they took out Russia's supply lines, or they did something that will have a material effect on the outcome of the battle, or even of the war, or even will have a material effect on Russia's ability to prosecute the conflict. What they're doing now, Alexander McCurry refers to them as pinpricks. Some people refer to them as PR operations, but it's, let's take a drone and hit somewhere here, wherever we can hit. Let's take a missile and we'll fire some missiles, and maybe one will get through, maybe one will hit the Kerch Bridge, these are all symbolic things. And I would argue that if you look at the Russian military and the way they operate, right, not a lot of symbolism there. They tend to be pretty straightforward. We're going to use artillery. We're going to dig some trenches. We're going to do some basic doctrinal things. And we're not going to tell you what we're doing next. We're not going to tell you what we're planning. We're not going to tell you how many people we lost. We're not going to tell you much of anything. We're not going to share a lot of information with you. We're going to continue doing what we're doing. And I suspect that all this business about trying to cross Russia's red lines, trying to figure out what Russia's red lines are, that is an exercise for the West to keep itself busy. And Russia's probably okay with the exercise, with the West doing these exercises to keep itself busy. Because, as I put it like this, you're a person, right? And let's say we say the amount of energy that you have to do your job, to handle your home life, to do all the things you need, are 100% of your energy. If you take 20% of your energy and you focus on somebody else, something else, you only got 80% left. If you take another 20% and focus that now on something else, you only got 60% left, right? So the reality is, the more energy that you focus on things that are not part of your goal, the further it takes you away from your goal, the slower you're going to be able to achieve your goal. So if the Ukrainians' goal, as it were, is to defeat Russia on the battlefield, is to get through the minefields and cut off the land bridge to Crimea and take back Melitopol and all blah, 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 then the more energy that they spend on sailing quadcopters into the side of a friggin' building in the financial district of Moscow, and busting some windows open or something, the more they spend their time and energy on that, the less effective they will be on the battlefield. So in a way, for the Russians, it's like, look, if you're going to spend 25% of your energy trying to fly a drone into a building on the outskirts of Moscow, and that energy could have been focused on the battlefield, on attacking our soldiers on the battlefield, on attacking our supply lines, etc., then go for it. Do it. I would not think. Now, certainly the Russians don't, it's an issue. The Russians don't want to get their homeland attacked, but it serves an additional purpose. And that is, if you're fighting a war, what do you need? You need support from your people at home. You need support. You need the people at home to be behind the war. You need the people at home to say, go get them. Kind of like you're playing a football, a game. You need the crowd to be there cheering, say, go get them. When you score a goal, you want pandemonium. People are screaming, go crazy when you score a goal, right? And if you got a war going on and you're Russia right now, you need the support of the people. In case they have to make sacrifices, you want them ready to make sacrifices. In case they lose some battles, in case there's some losses, something doesn't work out, you want the people to be ready to roll, right? You want the people to be saying, hey, we're ready to take the heat, because this is what we're doing is important. As the West continues these pinprick attacks, I haven't seen any of them that, like, they haven't taken a building down or something. They cross the border, they, I don't know, blow up a truck or something like that. They shoot at some civilians, maybe, an artillery round lands here or there, but of no major damage. But it pisses the people off. It infuriates the Russian people, and it makes the Russian people say, if you're the leader of Russia, this is what you want people to be saying. You don't want people to say, we want this thing's over. Get our troops home. Let's get out of here. You want them to say, how come you're not fighting harder? How come you're not going after them more? You always want your home people to have, you want to have what they call in business, they call it, what is it? Something demand. But the bottom line is this: you want your product to be in demand in business, right? You want people to all be standing in line saying, when can I get that next iPhone? When can I get that next pair of Jordans? When can I get whatever it is that's coming out, right? And if you are prosecuting a military operation, as is the Russian government, you want the people constantly to say, hey, how come you're not going far enough? How come you're not hitting hard enough, punching hard enough? And to have themselves ready. They're steeled for the next attack. And every time they get hit again, they get madder. So in a way, in an interesting way, one could make an argument that these, as I call them, they are pinprick attacks. If you're fighting a country the size of Russia and you bend a flagpole every now and then, knock off a few ceiling tiles, maybe shoot a civilian car, land to artillery and, across the border or something like that. Yeah, I'm calling that a pinprick attack, mainly because it will not materially affect the war, and it's not intended to affect the war materially. It is a sign of desperation. I can't do anything else. What am I going to do? I'll throw a rock across the border. Is it going to stop them? Is it going to change anything? No, but I'll feel better because I threw a rock, and then I can celebrate. I threw a rock across the border and it hit a Russian in the head. It's just going to piss that Russian off, and ain't going to kill him, and everybody around him is going to get angrier. But you can say, I got some stress out. I threw a rock and it hit a Russian guy in the head. That's effectively what these things are. And certainly, don't get me wrong, it's easy for me to say I don't have an artillery round raining down near my house. So from the perspective of the Russian people, I understand, yes, these kinds of things are, dangerous. And if you're facing them, I ain't facing them. If I was facing them, I'd be concerned and worried and scared. But I'd also be saying to my government, you better do something about these people. You better blow these people to kingdom come and stop us because they're attacking us in our homeland. And so there is some benefit to Russia to being attacked in their homeland, to the Russian government to maintain support. And for this particular military operation and for the other policies that are accompanying it. Remember, the other policies are if for Russia is facing away from the West, putting your back to the West and going east. And one of the things I think that is interesting is, let's find this. Let's looky here, looky here, looky here. Kim Jong-un inspects Russian hypersonic weapons, right? So he visited an airfield. There he is with Sergei Shoigu, right? They're showing him the latest bombers, TU, whatever the hells. They showed him all the latest fighters, Su-35s, 30s, blah, blah, blah. Particular attention was paid to their flight characteristics and weapons capabilities. You know, they showed him the Kinzhal and the MiG-31s, right? So they're showing him lots of stuff. So on Friday, the North Korean leader visited military and civilian aviation pants. I think that means plants in the city of Komsomolsk on Amur in the whatever the hell region. I can't pronounce that stuff because I'm not Russian, and my Russian is not good. Okay, so one of the things I think that's happened here is the U.S. in threatening North Korea and China and Russia has built a triumvirate of resistance in that area. Let's not forget, I think the Russian border with North Korea is somewhere around 100 or under 100 kilometers. But Russia does have a border with North Korea. Russia. So you have China, you have Russia, you have North Korea. The United States is in Ukraine. It is shipping missiles to Taiwan, and it is parking nuclear submarines on the doorstep of North Korea. So the United States is, excuse me, menacing these three countries. The U.S. is also trying to build this Asian NATO, and it's going from country to country saying, "Won't you join us in the struggle against China?" Which a lot of Asian countries are like, "No, we certainly will not." So it's trying to build up in Asia. It only makes sense that the Russians would then say to the North Koreans and the Chinese, hey, look, we need to talk. We got to build up a defensive front, right? A defensive front against any kind of an Asian NATO. And I think that's what you're seeing. I think you're going to see now. One of the things that was said was North Korea may provide some artillery rounds or something to Russia. My understanding is Russia's pretty good with artillery rounds. They don't need them, but it's possible. I don't know. But one thing we do know, and that is Russia has hypersonic weapons. Russia has some fantastic, very highly technically advanced fighters and anti-aircraft, air defense equipment, etc. And that North Korea could use some of it. So it would not surprise me at all if the meeting of between the leaders of North Korea and Russia result in some kind of sharing of military technology and or sharing of military hardware. Um, and not just to defend North Korea, certainly to defend North Korea, but with a recognition that in the same way that the U.S. is trying to build some kind of an Asian NATO, that Russia, North Korea, and China, who all have boundaries together, that if the three of them combine their military might, that it would be very difficult for the U.S. to take on China or anybody else in the Asian region. That would be a defensive front that would be really, really hard to overcome. And it would be hard enough to overcome that you've got three nuclear powers. You've got let's look how big Russia is. Russia goes from Eastern Europe all the way to the Pacific, all the way to North Korea and China, borders with both. Right. So when you look at those borders, let me look at this. Let me see if I can find it in. let's see if we can look at it. I always like to do this, maps. I always like to do this. Let's take a look at the map and see what we see. Okay, so here we got North Korea, right? But look what we got here. Okay, we got Russia, right? We got China here. Okay, so we got big old Russia's here. This gigantic landmass is here, and it comes down. You see Vladivostok down here, not far from Japan, right? So the Russians have, if you look at it, they've got, of course, you've got, I'm having trouble moving things around. If you look, here's Moscow by Europe, near Europe. So the Russians are in the North Atlantic region, but it's so big. If you go all the way to the eastern regions and you look at Vladivostok here, boom, it's right next to North Korea. And of course, China. Huge, where are we at? Yep, North Korea, China is there's China. There we go. There we go. Beijing here, and there's North Korea. Okay, so both Russia and Russia and China border North Korea. Also, North Korea. Now, one of the things that the neocons want to do is to utilize Japan, to use South Korea and Japan against China, to set up South Korea and Japan so that they've got all these bases and that they can use bases from South Korea to, to go, if they go to war with China, to use South Korea and Japan. Well, look what North Korea does. North Korea now makes it very problematic for South Korea because Russia can move stuff or they can coordinate with North Korea. And they'll be in a position, if there really were a war here, they'll be in a position, as you can see, Japan running along there, to put Japan in a tenuous position and to put South Korea in a tenuous position. So there you've got North Korea up there, you've got Taiwan. So if the neocons want to attack from Japan, they're not far from North Korea and South Korea, and of course Vladivostok. So if the Russians and Chinese and North Koreans build this, that means look at that big front they've got. Look where it starts. They've got all the way down here. If you look down at, say, Hong Kong and beneath that, right? That means they've got a front that they can attack from way down here near Hong Kong and Vietnam, who's an ally, but near all of that area. But look how far it runs. Look at that. Here's Russia all the way, all the way, to Alaska, you might as well say. They've got a front from Alaska all the way down to Vietnam. That's Russia, China, North Korea. They've got the entire coastline covered. Look at that. We start down here in Vietnam, Hong Kong, you see that? And then we run up, we've got North Korea, which now makes their South Korea, Japan advantage weaker. And then, of course, there's the whole Russian Pacific front we've got all the way up. So what we've got is, in bringing North Korea into the fold, in bringing North Korea militarily into the Russia-China fold, right? What it does is it makes Russia and China basically, and here's what I see. It makes Russia and China really, really tough on the Pacific front. And it also shows to me that Russia's thinking about, if the NATO, who wants to go after Russia, if NATO goes after China, then I think it's odds on at that point that Russia's in the mix. That if NATO's going after China, then NATO's going to have to fight Russia and China. But now we're adding what happens when they arm North Korea to the teeth, right? What happens if they give North Korea Kinzhal missiles or some kind of hypersonic technology, period, or help them develop their own hypersonic technology? Or say we're going to lend you hypersonic technology, or we're going to put Russian people in your base with Russian missiles and things of that nature, right? So now, bottom line is this: if Russia, North Korea, and China all align, they can, that whole Pacific front and that whole Pacific coast, they can cover, they can fire from inside of their own airspace. And the US has to attack from either its bases, and its bases will be open and naked for being attacked from all of those places. So if the US would decide, okay, we are going to start a war in the Pacific, now if they're looking at Russia and China and North Korea, it's not a pretty look. It's not a pretty look. And there would be no place in the Pacific really where they could operate, no place in that whole Pacific region where they could operate planes and vessels, etc., where they wouldn't be in a lot of trouble in a hurry, where they wouldn't be more often than not in range of some kind of Russian, North Korean, or Chinese attacks. And it also makes things much more tenuous for Japan. Keep in mind something. Japan gets a lot of energy from Russia. So if that war were to start and Russia was going to say, you ain't getting anything from us, no energy, then how would Japan even prosecute a war on behalf of the United States or in alignment with the United States without energy, without the energy to run their country, much less the energy to go to war with China? So I think what we're seeing is now an alignment that is preparation, saying we're going to make it not a preparation to go to war with the United States unless it has to, but I think it's the preparation to set the region up to make it almost impossible for the United States to consider going to war with China when it sees, look, with this thing set up, it's a whole setup. And if we go in there, and if Russia says we're in, and North Korea says we're in, then there's no place safe. There's no place safe in Korea. There's no place safe in Japan. There's no place safe from Russian, Chinese, and Japanese missiles. In one part of Asia, in the lower part, you've got Japanese missiles coming from everywhere. You've in the other parts where if you've got, say, North Korea and in Russia, now you've got like Kinzhal missiles with what, 1,700-kilometer range. When you start putting those dotting your coast of Russia, dotting the coast of south of North Korea with these hypersonic missiles with a 1,500, 1,700-kilometer range, what is that, 1,200 miles or so? They don't have to be really close together. They can be 1,200 miles apart, a clump of them every 1,200 miles, and they can cover all of that area. So they're looking to make, basically, I think what it is they're looking to make it too costly for the U.S. to decide to try to go to war in the Pacific region. I think that's what this is going on. Recently, you may not know this, the Russians did in the Pacific, they had their Pacific fleet. I think they had a couple hundred boats, and they did these big exercises to demonstrate their ability in the Pacific. So I think the Russians are building up their Pacific fleet, and they're putting themselves, they're dramatically increasing their military. They're putting themselves in a position where I feel right now they're in a position to defend their eastern border against NATO, but NATO's not in a position to attack that border anyway. NATO right now is doing some kind of big gigantic, so they say, war games, and Russia's like they're planning for some war games, and they're like, this is going to be the biggest war games on Russia's border since the Cold War started. It's going to be 40,000 troops. Well, 40,000 troops are not going to get it done on Russia's border. You're going to need 400,000 troops. 40,000 ain't going to get it done on Russia's border. They ain't going far. So again, as I've said before, they don't have the numbers to put on Russia's border to challenge Russia, and then to be able to put them on Russia's border, and then to maintain the supplies that they need and all the other things, and Russia's in there firing from its own airspace. No, NATO is not in a position to go to war with Russia. They're not in a military, physical, kinetic position to go to war with Russia on Russia's border. And of course, I would argue they're not really in a position to go to war with China on China's border, but they may be stupid enough to try. And I think what we're seeing now is, think about this. Let's give you something else. Leader of North Korea comes to Russia And one of the first places that they visit was Roscosmos. It's a space center where Russia uses to launch things into space, what have you, right? Now, recently there were these war games, there's some war games going on in the Korean Peninsula area, anti-North Korean war games. And for the first time ever, the US quote Space Force is going to be involved in these war games, right? Well, I don't think it's an accident that they do this. The so-called Space Force is involved, and what do you know? North Korea is in North Korean leaders in Russia at one of their spaceports, one of their space launch sites. I think that we will see very, very significant sharing of technology between Russia and North Korea. And they may not necessarily tell the world what it is. They may. But I think North Korea is at a very, very important spot, and particularly when it comes to Japan. And I think since the U.S. is trying to arm Japan, you're going to see, you're going to see North Korea get arms and technology, etc. I think from both Russia and China, and they're going to get a lot more arms. And the interesting thing is that the U.S. always tries to paint the leaders of North Korea as crazy people and madmen. Of course, the leaders of Russia, the China, everybody's madmen, but Biden and his madmen and women. But Russia and China obviously doesn't think that Kim Jong Un is a madman, that Kim Jong Un is a madman, and they are willing to trust him with their stuff. And I mean, let's face it, why wouldn't you? He already has nuclear weapons, and he's made it clear, I'm not going to use the nuclear weapons unless I'm attacked. I will only use them defensively. So how crazy is the person that says, I will only use I have nuclear weapons for defense, but I only use them defensively? So I think it's really important. And let me tell you why it's important that Vladimir Putin met with Kim Jong Un, because he's going to Beijing in October. That's the one I'm watching. The Russian leader is going to Beijing in October, which I'm wondering to meet with his good buddy, his bosom pal, his bestie friend, BFF, Xi Jinping. I wonder a couple of things. I gotta wonder, will there be a Russian offensive before then? But although, the Russians love to do that. They love to keep you on the edge of their seats and wondering when the Russian offensive. As I've said, me, Garland said, if it was me, I would be in a rush to do an offensive. But there are some signs they may be. There may be some signs they may be in a rush, that they may do some offensive. And one of the things, I don't think the Russians will expend it all and just overrun it. But I do think the Russians could lay some heavy punches on the Ukrainians, some nasty punches on the Ukrainians, and then sit back and see if the West says we want to, or the Ukrainians say we want to talk. Because I do think the Russians want to talk, but they don't trust the West. And they know the West won't talk, so they may punch them up a little bit, see if that softens them. They may punch the Ukrainians up a bit, see if that softens their stances, or some of the people's stances, and sees what happened. But something, I think, is that some things are connected to President Putin's meetings in Beijing. Could possibly be a pre-meeting what do you call it, offensive. Could also be, hey, look, I've been talking with a North Korean leader. I'm going to give them X, you give them Y. I'm going to give them this, you give them that. I wonder, here's something I'm wondering about. Keep an eye out for this. I wonder if we're going to see a combination Russian and Chinese base built somewhere. That's what I wonder. Maybe in Africa, let me see. Watch this. Here's something of consequence. Look at this, in case you hadn't noticed it. Former French colonies create military alliance. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have signed a security pact. The military governments of 3 African states, which all deposed their Western-backed leaders, have agreed to assist each other individually or collectively in case of external aggression, right? And basically, they said they've done it with the aim of establishing a collective defense and mutual assistance framework. Any attack on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of one or more contracted parties will be considered an aggression against the other parties. That ain't saying that any of these parties are particularly militarily strong, but what that does say is, don't think you're just going to attack Niger and you're going to have a fun day. If you're going to attack Niger, you're going to destabilize the whole region. And if you destabilize the whole region, I think there's going to be millions of Western, West Africans heading down through Libya as refugees from the military conflict. You're going to destabilize the whole region, which means, and this is what I know, I guarantee the West is concerned, France, etc. They still have puppets in some countries. They got a puppet in Nigeria, et cetera, right? There are countries that are still unstable that they still have some power over. What happens if they destabilize the whole region and the few countries that they do have left, that the revolutionary forces in those countries may be supported by exterior powers? I don't know if Russia or China or Iran would support them, but I wouldn't want to swear on a stack of Bibles that they wouldn't, because it's possible. So if the West destabilizes the entire West Africa region, then they're now facing a possibility that the few countries left that they do have control over are overthrown, and that they end up in the midst of that security pact. So they're taking a chance of losing it all if they do this. So I think the West African countries that are coming together wisely and doing the security pact is protected for them all. And I do believe through Algeria is a powerful country, very, very much aligned with Russia. I believe that there may be weapons smuggled, as it were, provided, however you want to put it, to some of these countries, maybe from some of the anti-imperialist countries, maybe a Russia and a China provide some weapons to some of these African countries to defend themselves. Let's just say this: it wouldn't be the first time that the Soviet Union or Russia has provided weapons to anti-imperialist forces in Africa to fight against neocolonialism or colonialism in Europe and America. Wouldn't be the first time. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that's the move. I think right now, what we're looking at is and they understand it, a worldwide conflict. And I think the neocons in the US are overstretched. They got problems at home. They're trying to fight back against the potential internal uprisings here through censorship and lots of other things. And now they're like, oh crap, the Russians are now getting awful friendly with the North Koreans. We can't get Vietnam. They won't join us. They're looking around, and Russia and China are making more friends. And I believe the next move, I don't know if you know this, the Iranians have some Russian training jets that they're being trained for Russian fighters. And I think they're going to get, I don't know if they're going to get Su-25s, Su-30s, whatever. They're going to get some very high-tech, supposedly they're getting at least a squadron or so of some high-tech Russian fighters. So Iran will be getting some more, and they're doing well as far as advancing their own weapons, but they'll be getting some advanced weapons. And I'm pretty sure after what happened, after Kim Jong-un going to meet with Vladimir Putin, and then after he meets with Vladimir Putin, he hangs out with Sergei Shoigu, and he's at one day he's at a spaceport, the next day he's looking at hypersonic missiles and fighters and all that. There will be technological assistance, I believe. And it will be, let's make sure that North Korea is powerful enough and has the technology that it needs, so that if something kicks off in the Pacific region, they will be an erstwhile military ally that will be able to put the hurt on whoever needs to put the hurt on if the region goes up in flames. That they'll be able to protect themselves adequately, and B, they'll be able to be part of the China-Russia alliance, and their particular position in that area will be of great value. What next with Russia and China? I'm guessing some bases, somewhere, maybe Africa, maybe Iran, maybe, I don't know. Be interesting to see what happens if Russia and China start to move into South America more, because the United States and Latin America, because let's face it, the United States says no country in Latin America can have a military alliance with any country outside of the region, or else. However, they also say any country around the world that we want a military alliance with, we can have. So I think Russia and China may try that a little bit. I think we already see Nicolas Maduro, who is the leader of Venezuela. He's been, for the last week or so, he's been in China doing the old handshake and huggy, a lovey-dovey with Xi Jinping. And I think China is going to do more and more work with Venezuela, and they're going to really try the US, but not militarily. I think what China is going to say is this: look, we're not trying to build a military alliance in South America. That ain't who we are, but we're going to build economic alliances to bloody hell. We'll build economic alliance after economic alliance. And what are you going to say? What you said is you don't want any military alliances, or you're ready to go to war. We ain't trying to build military alliances. We'll build economic alliances. What happens, though, when Venezuela's economy gets built back up to the point where they can start buying Su-25s or whatever the hell they want, of Su-30s? What happens when they get enough money that they can buy what the hell they want? And they're included into, eventually, I believe Venezuela will eventually be in BRICS, I think maybe next year. But Venezuela is very much a part of the plans of Russia and China, as is Nicaragua, and I believe to some extent eventually will be Cuba. So the U.S. is in a situation where I think that and I think Russia sees this, and China sees this, North Korea. Next year, starting in November, we're in that last year leading up to the election. That will put the Bidens in a difficult position. Also, the Biden neocons, also, let's not forget, Biden's facing impeachment. And the neocons are, got to be concerned, looking over their shoulders, and the Democratic Party's trying to figure out how the hell to get rid of Biden. So the Democrats have a lot of trouble. It may be a bit of a period. If I'm the Russians and Chinese, I'm thinking they probably don't want to start World War III before the election. That's not a good look. So that gives you an opportunity to really do some building, to bring North Korea into the fold, to bring Iran more into the fold, and I think it'll be a protective move. All right, let's see if we got any. All right, let's see. Zach says Max seems oblivious to the code pinkification of gray zone and how the lockdown left is jacking his emotions to max. Worse, pink zone doesn't sound as good. I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean. The lockdown left is jacking his emotions to max. I don't know. The code pinkification of gray zone. I don't know. Whatever. But that Gray Zone does some great work. Love Max Blumenthal. So if you could explain it a little bit clearer, I guess I'm not bright enough to figure that one out. Sparky says, Garland, all this may be true, but when the U.S. leads with its values, watch out. Yeah, that's all it leads. That's all it's got. We're not sure. I'll put it like this: the values of the Blinkens and all those people sure aren't the values of the rest of us, are they? Sparky, Nigerian news editor who Nico House interviewed in August, said Nigerian military isn't keen on invading Niger for neocolonialism, and they don't listen to their puppet president. May very well be. I tend to think they're going to have trouble getting that invasion. I agree with that. They're going to have big trouble getting that invasion. A lot of Africans are going to say no. Let's look on Rockfin, see if there's anything happening over there. Did somebody? Okay, we got some people got some questions and statements. Thanks, Garland, from username. Deborah Wilson says, thanks, Garland. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see what somebody says. Putin should just take the name Romanov and declare Imperial Russia and reopen the summer palace in Odessa. If he did, King Charles will start trying to marry off a granddaughter too. Dick on Rockfin, man, you're really getting into history there, aren't you? A lot of people won't understand that, but that's okay. Sparky says, make Ukraine Russia again. Let me see. This person says, G. Nixon, great program. Thanks for all you do. Thanks a lot. Let's see. I'm going to look through. World wars are highly inflationary. Anyone feeling the inflation yet? 10 times those prices in a world war. Oh, yeah, another world war will be worse than inflationary if we have one. Japanese style architecture that's over 100 years old, loose power lines, high winds, and 12-foot cane grass make for a bad combination. No conspiracy hypothesis needed. I'm not joking. Paint your house roof blue. The infrared light doesn't see blue. Interesting. Nazi stems from National Socialist Party. Hitler was a leftist. Yeah, sure. He hated leftists. But, here's what I find. What's interesting is this. I don't know why. I don't understand it, so you'll forgive me. People who are on the right gotta just say that Hitler and fascism is on the left. People who are on the left gotta say that Hitler and fascism is on the right. Everybody has to say, I'm on the far opposite side of fascism. It's this other group that I hate. They're the fascists, or they're the Nazis, or they're the leftists, or whoever it is that I hate. We got to put them in a nice little box. And that box has to be the other group, not the group that I'm in. There's no possibility that people with my ideology could be fascist. You're deluding yourself. I mean, I understand it, but you're deluding yourself. You're going to put Hitler was a leftist. Hitler hated leftists. Let's see. He's a leftist. How do you feel about trade unions? Killed them. How do you feel about communists? Killed them. How do you feel about people on the left? Killed them. So he was a lefty who hated, murdered, slaughtered it. And what was his biggest enemy? The communists. So they're communists who hate communists and Franco and all of these people. How about Pinochet? He was a fascist. I guess he was a far left, even though he did everything he could to kill people on the far left. It's interesting. And what is interesting to me is not whether fascism or left is left or right or whatever, because it's neither in a way. Because I would argue that the Biden people, the ultra liberals, are fascists, right? The so-called centrists are fascists. Stalin was a lefty, seemed like a fascist to me. Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, right-wingers, fascist to me. Fascism is fascism, right? The neocons are fascist. I wish they were leftist. But fascism can rear its ugly head anywhere. It's just that what I find interesting is the need that people have. Why it's so important to some people to say, I'm in this group, and the other group is fascist. And that's the only group that could be fascist. Left is a fascist. Nobody on the right could ever be fascist. Oh, I'm a centrist. Nobody on the center could ever be fascist. It's only the left and right. Whatever group people are in, they have to, for some reason, I guess it's, I don't know, something internal. They have to say, the other group that I hate most, not my group, those guys are the fascists. Nobody in my group could ever be fascist. I don't understand the psychological need to do that. It's not a need to understand fascism, to evaluate fascism. It's a need to put it in a nice little box, and that box has to be the opposite of the group I'm in. It's a way. Sometimes when people do that, it tends to, for me, to think people do that when they're a little nervous. They're a little nervous about their group. They're a little nervous about the group they're in. So we now have to push fascism away. There's a term in psychology, and it is called what is it? Oh, there's three words that come up. Deny, project, attack, right? It's not me. It's you, and I'm going to attack you for it, right? It's like the person who hates gay people to all bloody hell. There's nothing in the world they hate worse than gay people, and you find out that person's a gay. Why? Because they denied it in themselves. They projected it onto the other gay person, then they hated the gay person, right? So when people are like, no, that group over there has to be the fascist, it leads me to believe that there's some deny, project, attack stuff going on. No, nobody in my group could possibly be it. That group is, and we've got to attack them. Deny, project, attack. Bad news for you. The reality is fascism can find its ugly head all over creation. There are those who say that fascism is crashing capitalism, that when capitalism starts to fall apart and crash, that the result you get is fascism. I don't know, because let's face it, as I said, Stalin was a communist, and in my opinion, he was a fascist. He was a fascist. He was a different kind of fascist than Hitler. And that's the other thing. right? If you say democracy, there are different kinds of democracies. You've got a parliamentary system, you've got a representative democracy, you've got different types, right? Republic, which is kind of a form of democracy. So you've got different types. Well, guess what? In the same way, you got different kinds of fascism, right? The fascism of Hitler and the fascism of Mussolini was somewhat different. And the Mussolini's fascism leaned more towards focusing on the incestuous relationship between state and and corporations, whereas Hitler's fascism was first and foremost an ethno-fascism. It was first and foremost was saying we're members of the Aryan group, and this ethnicity of ours is superior, and so we will found everything that all of the foundings of our all of the pillars of our fascist regime will be based on our ethnicity being superior to everyone else. That's why it's okay for us to run the world, take all these countries over, enslave, do whatever we want, because ethnically we're superior to everyone else. So you've got fascism that may be based on government mixing with corporations, which is the U.S. fascism, a good part of it. You may have fascism that's an ethnic form of fascism. I would argue that Israel has an ethnic form of fascism. Their ethnic and apartheid ways are an ethno-fascism. That's why, let's face it, the Ukrainian Nazis love Israel. They've even said, we'd like to pattern ourselves after this ethnic fascism. So there's the fascism. Not only is it not just either left or right, there are various strains of fascism. There are various different types of communism. There's the communism of Cuba versus the, as China says, socialism with Chinese characteristics, which leads about 30% of their businesses are in the market, and the other 70% is run by the government. So you have a hybrid system there. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. So different types of governments. There's not just one socialism, not just one capitalism, not just one fascism. So when you simply say my enemies, they're all fascism, that implies that there's one kind of fascism, which says that you don't really understand fascism. In the same way, if you think democracy is good or democracy is bad, you're not understanding that there's various forms of democracies. You have to say which form of democracy. At any rate, thanks a lot, everybody. It's Saturday night. I'm kind of tired. Let me see if there's anybody else who has things to say. Hey, how about this? Red Chili Pepper, thanks a lot for the super sticker there. Sparky, go by actions, not by labels. Exactly. Sparky's very smart. Zach says, facing an anti-war rally or WW3, World War III, Code Pink chose war. I don't know. I know. Vita in DC says, my group, I've decided I'm post-political party. There you go, Vita in DC. I'm in DC. Vita's in DC. Hitler was a vegetarian. There we go. And see, here's the thing. We could pick something out. Hitler was a vegetarian, right? Or you could say Hitler, I don't know, he liked German Shepherds. And so at that point, do we say, well, everybody who likes German Shepherds is a fascism? Hitler had a nose. Oh my God, everybody with a nose is a fascist, right? Hitler was a vegetarian. There was a lot of particulars about Hitler or any other fascist leader. You can say this particular fascist leader liked this, didn't like this, was this or that. But bottom line is this: there are various strains of fascism. That's all I'm getting. Various strains of any kind of political or ideological strain that you want, bin that you want. There's going to be different kinds of strains, and oftentimes they fight more violently amongst each other than the ones on the outside looking in. Anything else? I think I am. We got some new comments. During World War I, German Dachshunds were euthanized. You know, that ain't nice. Well, these are poor little Dachshunds. They ain't hurting anybody. Adam Smith, father of capitalism, wealth of nations, had a socialist slant to it. Okay, I don't know if that's supposed to be good or bad. Fascism, aside from being a critical mass accretion of power, is typically intolerant of those outside its individual likeness, again with individualism. National Socialism, far-right counter-project to international socialism. One thing I will recommend a book to everyone, and the book is called Conjuring Hitler. Conjuring, so everybody can see it. All right, here's a book recommendation for my dear and fluffy friends. Conjuring Hitler, How Britain and America Made the Third Reich Nazism is usually depicted as the outcome of political blunders and unique economic factors. We are told that it could not be prevented and that it will never be repeated. In this explosive book, Guido Glaucomo Preparata shows that the truth is very different. Using meticulous economic analysis, he demonstrates that Hitler's extraordinary rise to power was in fact facilitated and eventually financed by the British and American political classes during the decade following World War I. Through a close analysis of events in the Third Reich, Preparata unveils a startling history of Anglo-American geopolitical interest in the early 20th century. He explains that Britain, still clinging to his empire, was terrified of an alliance forming between Germany and Russia. He shows how the UK, through the Bank of England, came to exercise control over Weimar Germany, and how Anglo-American financial support for Hitler enabled the Nazis to seize power. This controversial study shows that Nazism was not regarded as an aberration for the British and American establishment of the time. It was regarded as a convenient way of destabilizing Europe and driving Germany into conflict with Stalinist Russia, thus preventing the formation of any rival continental power bloc. Guido Preparata lays bare the economic forces at play in the Third Reich and identifies the key players in the British and American establishment who aided Hitler's meteoric rise. So all I'm saying is this: there's always more to it than meets the area. And let me add this: you might not know this. Hitler had a picture in his office. You know who it was? Henry Ford. He had a picture of Henry Ford in his office. And Hitler, the Nazis argued that they took a lot of their ethnic and racial policies and views from basically the American South, what was then the apartheid American South. That was an ethnic fascist area as far as Black people were concerned. I mean, America had it had apartheid in America. It had fascism in America. You can't have apartheid without fascism. So we will discuss the fascism in Germany. We'll discuss the fascism in Stalin's Russia. But what we can't discuss is that you can't have a country with slaves or with post-slavery apartheid that isn't fascist. That's the very nature of fascism. Germany, I mean, they had a lot of terrible things. They didn't have slaves. Well, they did. They made some of the Jews slaves. Russia, they had Siberian work camps and stuff like that. And the U.S. had basically a gigantic apartheid. It was an apartheid country back in the 30s and 40s. It was apartheid, bottom line, an apartheid country at that time. So America had its own brand of fascism. And we talk about everybody else with fascism. America had its own brand at the time. That's what the truth. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Let's see. The assembly line was loved by industrialists, and Ford supported the fascists. Oh, look at it. Ford was a fascist. His assistant, Ernest Liebold, was eventually outed as a German spy. He bought the Dearborn Independent, Henry Ford, just so he could rail against Jews. He hated Jews. He was an interesting guy, but he was anti-Semitic and, really pro-Nazi. In fact, Hitler gave him the Iron Cross, which was the highest award that anyone who was not a German citizen could get, the Iron Cross award. And Hitler gave that to Henry Ford. So yeah, Henry Ford was no prize. All right. There was another book called, I think, The American Axis, the something axis, and it was about Henry Ford. It was about what's his name, the guy that flew the Spirit of St. Louis. It was about a number of people who Lindbergh, who were in the West but were basically fully captured by the ideology of the the Austrian gentleman with the funny mustache. All right, thanks a lot, people. I'm out.